Welcome to the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner Prepcast, where we guide you through everything you need to know for your certification exam. Whether you're just starting or looking to refine your knowledge, this course will set you up for success. Brought to you by baremetalcyber.com. Let's get started. When working with AWS, one of the first decisions you'll face is how to actually access the platform. AWS offers multiple access pathways: the graphical management console, the command line interface, software development kits, and the browser-based CloudShell. Each of these serves different needs. The console is intuitive and visual, ideal for one-time tasks or exploring new services. The CLI and SDKs shine when repeatability, automation, or integration with applications is required. CloudShell bridges convenience and flexibility by giving you a CLI in the browser with storage attached. For learners, the key idea is that all paths ultimately do the same thing: send API calls to AWS. But each pathway offers a different style of interaction depending on the job. The AWS Management Console is the most familiar interface. It is web-based, accessible from any browser, and provides menus, dashboards, and wizards to configure services. At the top of the console is the region selector, which determines where your resources will be deployed. Selecting the wrong region is a common beginner mistake, leading to confusion when resources seem to, quote, disappear. The console is ideal for learning and for tasks where visibility matters, such as reviewing metrics or exploring service dashboards. For learners, think of it as the storefront where everything AWS offers is displayed, searchable, and clickable. Sign in to the console happens through IAM roles or AWS Identity Center. IAM users and roles can be given console access, but Identity Center is now the preferred approach for managing workforce identities. It provides single sign-on and reduces the sprawl of separate credentials across accounts. Regardless of how you log in, permissions always come from policies, whether they're IAM policies, SCPs in organizations, or permission boundaries. Beginners should remember that the interface doesn't change the rules. No matter how you sign in, your permissions are still determined by policy. The AWS CLI, or command line interface, is a text-based tool for issuing AWS commands directly. Version 2 is the current standard, with improvements in installation, authentication, and usability over version 1. It is available on Windows, macOS, and Linux. Installing the CLI enables you to interact with AWS in scripts or directly from a terminal. For beginners, think of it as switching from point-and-click menus to typing commands into a prompt. The CLI requires more precision, but rewards you with speed and repeatability. Named profiles are a key feature of the CLI. They allow you to configure multiple sets of credentials and switch between them easily. For example, you might have one profile for development, another for production, and another for a training sandbox. Credentials can come from different sources: IAM users with access keys, Identity Center logins, or role assumptions. Beginners should see profiles as labeled key rings. Each profile holds a different set of keys, and you choose which one to use for each task. Authentication with the CLI can use different methods. Legacy setups often relied on access keys, which are long-lived and risky if leaked. Modern best practices prefer single sign-on authentication, where the CLI integrates with Identity Center to generate short-lived session tokens. This aligns with security principles by reducing the risk of stolen keys. Beginners should understand that while access keys may seem simple, they introduce long-term exposure, whereas SSO and temporary credentials are safer by design. The CLI also supports environment variables and configuration files to store credentials. For instance, AWS ACCE SSKEYID and AWS SECRET ACCE SSKEY environment variables can be used in temporary setups. Longer-term settings are placed in files like ~.aws/config and ~.aws/credentials. While convenient, environment variables must be protected, as exposing them in logs or code can compromise accounts. For learners, think of them as sticky notes, handy but risky if left out in the open. Config files are more structured, but both should be guarded carefully. AWS CloudShell provides a browser-based CLI environment pre-configured with the AWS CLI and common tools. It includes persistent storage for scripts and configurations, making it useful for quick tasks without installing anything locally. Beginners should see CloudShell as a lightweight workbench available from anywhere, secured by your AWS account login. It is not suited for heavy automation, but it is excellent for ad hoc exploration or demonstrations. Because it runs in your browser, CloudShell lowers the barrier to trying CLI commands without setup. For developers, AWS SDKs provide programmatic access to services in different programming languages. Examples include Boto 3 for Python, the AWS SDK for JavaScript, and SDKs for Java, Go, and C#. These libraries abstract away direct API calls, offering language-native methods for interacting with AWS. Beginners should think of SDKs as translators. Instead of learning AWS's API language, you use the language you already know, and the SDK handles the translation into API requests. SDKs are the backbone of building applications that integrate tightly with AWS services. Across all programmatic interfaces, AWS enforces rate limits and recommends retry strategies. API requests can fail due to throttling, network issues, or service constraints. SDKs and the CLI often implement retries with exponential backoff, meaning they wait progressively longer between attempts. Beginners should picture this as knocking on a busy door. If no one answers, you wait a bit longer before knocking again. These patterns prevent overloading services and ensure reliability under high demand. Security of credentials is a universal theme. Never hard-code access keys into scripts or code. Instead, use IAM roles, Secrets Manager, or the parameter store in Systems Manager to deliver credentials securely. Multi-factor authentication should be enabled for human logins, and session tokens should be short-lived. For learners, the key idea is that credentials are like house keys. They must be protected, rotated, and never left taped to the front door. Poor credential hygiene is one of the fastest ways environments get compromised. Private access to AWS services can be enforced through interface VPC endpoints, which route requests over the AWS private network instead of the Internet. This is especially important for sensitive services like KMS, S3, or Secrets Manager. Beginners should see this as driving through a private tunnel rather than a public highway. Both routes reach the destination, but one avoids unnecessary exposure. While endpoints may add cost, they provide stronger security and compliance alignment. Finally, basic troubleshooting is essential across interfaces. If a command fails, the first question to ask is whether it is an authentication issue. Are credentials missing or expired? If authentication succeeds but the action is denied, it is a permissions issue. The policy does not allow the request. Beginners should remember this distinction. Authentication asks, "Who are you?" while authorization asks, "What are you allowed to do?" Understanding this difference resolves many beginner frustrations quickly. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Choosing which AWS interface to use often depends on the nature of the task. For ad hoc operations, exploration, or when learning a new service, the AWS Management Console is the best fit. It is visual, intuitive, and makes it easy to click through menus. For repeatable tasks or automation, however, the CLI or SDKs are more powerful. They allow commands to be scripted and reused, making them efficient for large-scale operations. Beginners should think of it like cooking. Sometimes you improvise a meal in the kitchen, and sometimes you follow a written recipe so you can reproduce it exactly every time. The console is improvisation. The CLI and SDKs are recipes. Infrastructure as code tools such as CloudFormation or Terraform often align with the CLI and SDKs because they rely on programmatic interfaces to deploy resources consistently. This makes the CLI and SDKs natural companions for automation and large-scale provisioning. By comparison, the console is slower and more prone to human error if used for these purposes. For learners, this demonstrates how AWS pushes organizations toward automation. The more infrastructure you manage, the more you need programmatic interfaces to keep it secure, consistent, and auditable. CloudShell offers unique use cases. It is great for demonstrations, workshops, and quick fixes when you do not have the CLI installed locally. It also provides persistent storage for scripts, so you can keep a small library of commands handy in the cloud. Its constraints are that it is not suited for high-performance automation or integration with external systems. For learners, CloudShell is best thought of as a portable workbench, always ready when you log in, but not the right tool for heavy-duty projects. Credential rotation and short-lived sessions remain a key theme across all interfaces. Access keys should be avoided when possible, replaced by roles that generate temporary credentials. If keys are used, they must be rotated frequently and protected. Beginners should compare this to regularly changing the locks on a building or issuing temporary badges to visitors. AWS environments are more secure when no credential lasts longer than it needs to, and this principle applies equally to console, CLI, SDK, and CloudShell access. Audit trails are crucial. CloudTrail logs API calls made through all interfaces, whether they come from the console, CLI, SDKs, or CloudShell. This ensures accountability, regardless of which tool was used. For learners, this is like having security cameras that don't care if a person entered through the front door or a side entrance. Every action is still recorded. On the exam, remember that CloudTrail is the consistent logging layer across all access pathways. Cross-account workflows often use federation, where external identity providers grant access into AWS without separate credentials. This may involve SAML integration with corporate directories or OpenID Connect for web applications. Federation works equally well with console and CLI access, simplifying user management at scale. Beginners should think of this as using a passport to cross multiple borders, rather than applying for a new ID card in every country. It creates a smoother and more secure experience for large organizations. Least privilege applies just as much to developers and operators as it does to end users. Developers may only need permissions to retrieve secrets from Secrets Manager or Parameter Store, not broad access to KMS keys or S3 buckets. Operators may need rights to start and stop EC2 instances, but not to modify IAM policies. Beginners should remember, more access is never better. The exam will often present scenarios where the safe choice is the narrower, more precise permission set. Secrets retrieval patterns in code are another critical point. Applications should fetch credentials or API keys from Secrets Manager or Parameter Store at runtime rather than embedding them in configuration files. KMS can be used to encrypt sensitive values. For learners, this is like retrieving a key from a guarded vault each time you need it, rather than taping it under the keyboard. Secure retrieval ensures secrets are never hard-coded and are rotated automatically when needed. Organizing profiles becomes especially important in multi-account work. Developers may manage dozens of accounts, and profiles keep each set of credentials distinct. By naming profiles clearly, such as dev, prod, or audit, you reduce mistakes and avoid applying dangerous actions to the wrong account. Beginners should see profiles as labeled containers. Mixing them up can be costly, but keeping them clear prevents confusion. On the exam, multi-account context often points to profiles and role assumptions as the correct tools. Service control policies in AWS organizations apply regardless of which access pathway is used. Whether you act through the console, CLI, or SDKs, SCPs can prevent actions like disabling CloudTrail or creating resources in unapproved regions. Beginners should imagine this as federal law that applies no matter which local jurisdiction you're in. The pathway doesn't matter. The rules apply universally. On the exam, if you see organization-wide restrictions, the answer will likely involve SCPs. Cost awareness is also tied to access methods. Each API call counts, whether it comes from the CLI, SDK, or console. Queries that paginate results can multiply costs if not handled carefully. Running commands in the wrong region can create unexpected expenses or confusion. Beginners should think of this as making long-distance calls. Each one counts on the bill, and dialing the wrong country code adds charges quickly. Being mindful of calls, regions, and data volume is part of secure and efficient AWS usage. For exam preparation, tool-to-task mapping is essential. If a question involves one-time exploration, the console is the likely choice. If it's about automation or infrastructure as code, the CLI or SDKs are the correct answers. If the question asks about a browser-based CLI without local installation, CloudShell fits. Learners should memorize these distinctions, because the exam often tests awareness of which interface best matches each situation. The principle is always to pick the tool most directly aligned with the need. In summary, AWS provides multiple access interfaces, each designed for different contexts. The console offers visibility for ad hoc tasks, the CLI and SDKs provide repeatability and automation, and CloudShell delivers convenience with portability. Regardless of the interface, security principles remain constant. Use roles and MFA, rotate credentials, log every action, and enforce least privilege. For learners, the key message is simple. Choose the right tool for the job, but always secure the way you access AWS. Interfaces may differ, but the responsibility to protect access remains the same. That concludes today's episode of the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner Prepcast. Be sure to tune in for the next episode and visit us online at baremetalcyber.com or cyberauthor.me for more resources, including news, mailing lists, YouTube videos, podcasts, and much more.